It was not long in the book of Genesis till we came to our first war, and that's where we are right now today. Genesis 14:1. In the days of king of Amarath of Shinar, Arioch of Eleazar, Chedorlaomer of Elma, and Tidal of Gomi. This is just a way of dictating when this occurred. In many cases throughout history, you just simply name the leader or like the country or the empire to kind of set a ballpark of when it occurred in the chronological time span of history. It would be the same as saying during Obama's administration or when Hitler was in power, or in the case of Japan, they say what years they're born in based on the emperor at the time. They have these interesting time spans that way. There's different ways of naming times. I don't know if it's like a synecdoche where you have the generic for the specific and the specific for the generic. There might be some sort of aspect to that. I don't know what the colloquial turn of phrase would be for that, but that's just generally how that works. Genesis 14:2. They made war on the kings of Bereth of Sodom, Beershah of Gomar, Simba of Adimer, Shembar of Zemboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zor. So the king of Bela, that's Zor. Zor I thought was a place. I don't know. Is Bela the king of Zor? Something like that. So anyway, we got this group of nations. They're all kind of in that generalized location. You can look at a map and you can try to figure out where these places are. And there is other historical context for looking at this event in history. So there is more to it than that, but we're not going to be doing a deep dive on this. That would, yeah. Anyway, so there's going to be this war. Genesis 14:3. The latter kings joined together as allies in the valley of Shittim, which is now the dead Sea of Salt, which is the Dead Sea, where there's a lot of salt in it and everything like floats in it. It's supposed to be some crazy thing. It's like a therapeutic thing as well. People go there, they have their little salt baths, and they get maybe it helps with like their arthritis or something like that, supposedly, allegedly, something along those lines. So that's kind of where they're getting together for this giant battle that is going to occur in the location near the Dead Sea. At least that's somewhere we can still find on the map today and is kind of a significant place. Genesis 14:4. 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. So 12 years was good enough, and 13 was too many. And as long as I pronounce the name the same in every instance, it seems like I know what I'm doing when it comes to saying these very intense names. But we'll see. Genesis 14:5. And in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him attacked and subdued the Raphaim in Ashtar Kaim, in Zulam in Ham, and the Eliam in Shavak Kiliaphaim. So here we have the breakdown of the group that is battling. And in this section, we have the Raphaim, which in many cases is very similar to the Nephilim. So a lot of people are under the interpretation that they are like the mighty men of old and giants of valor, and that they may possibly be human angel hybrids. In the other section earlier on in Genesis, it mentions the sons of God marrying the daughters of men, and so they're kind of inferring some degree of sexual relationship there and creating an angel human hybrid that is much more mighty than conventional humans. There's also a possibility that that is not the case, and that these are simply powerful, strong dudes who are just, well, they grew up there and maybe they had some sort of food or environmental circumstance or selective breeding that created big boys who are really nice and strong and are a threat, a menace. And later on in the book of Genesis, I think it's later on in Genesis, that when we come back to this section in Canaan, there's giants in the land, and we were grasshoppers in their sight. So that could be what the case is as well, that they're just kind of in this area and they need to be put down at some point in time. So I don't know, but I don't want to commit entirely, wholeheartedly to the idea that the Nephilim or the Raphaim are necessarily human angel hybrids, that it's like some supernatural thing. But I don't want to discount that either, because there is a good chance that that is what we have going on here. It's really hard to say. This was several thousand years ago, and there's supporting arguments on either side. Just to take the neutral approach. Genesis 14:6. And the Hortes in the Mount of Seir as far as El Parayan, which is on the border of the wilderness. So that's just kind of the location of this battle to exterminate the Rephaim. Genesis 14:7. Then they turned back and came to En Mashpat, which is now Kadesh, and subdued all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites who dwelt in Hazon Tamar. So the battle, they just kept going in their conquering process. Genesis 14:8. Then the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, that is Zor, went out together, and they joined the battle in the valley of Shittim. So this is just turning into a pretty big conflict. We have this kind of extermination process going on, and getting reinforcements or adversaries to this conflict, depending on your perspective. Genesis 14:9, with the kings of Chedorlaomer of Elma, Tidal of Gomi, Amrimarath of Shinar, and Arnok of Eliezer. 4 kings against 5. So this is just a total melee here of the amount of kings. But the kings, what does that mean in respect to the amount of men that are underneath these individual kings? It doesn't really specify that there's just, one king has a significant more or less than another. This is just kind of the battle and the principalities involved with it. Genesis 14:10. Now in the valley of Shittim was full of slime and bituminous pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. They fell, were overthrown there, and the remainder of the kings fled to the mountains. So this battle didn't really go so good for them, and they had to flee. But that's usually how battles went. Everyone kind of goes in there. You have a little bit of, confrontation. Some people die. Some people get severely injured, and many more get wounded. And then they back up, and then they leave, and then they come back at a later date to continue on. Typically, wars do not escalate to the point of exterminations. Usually they're just kind of an extenuation of a little bit of a fist fight and a little bit of the blooding of the lip. That's usually not leading to a level of genocide. So the fighting, they kind of broke it off after escalated a little bit too much with all those parties involved. Genesis 14:11. The victors took all the wealth of Sodom and Gomorrah and all the supplies and provisions and departed. So there was some looting involved. They came in there, they attacked them to the point of them fleeing, and then I guess they were fleed out of the city, and they were able to just walk in there and rob the place and acquire additional wealth and provisions, which is that's a good strategy. Genesis 14:12. And they also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods with them. So now they've gone too far. You don't want to mess with Lot. Not because Lot is who he is, but because of his relationship to Abram. Because Abram and Lot, I mean, Lot is his nephew, and he's probably, just someone that he really cares for and is an endearing relative. So I don't think this would necessarily have been in the Bible if they didn't take Lot's. Well, they didn't take Lot. So Genesis 14:13. Then the ones who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, one from the other side, who was living by the oaks of the Terebinth of Manir, the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol and of Anir. These were allies of Abram. So this guy comes in there, he's going to tell him what's going on, and this is kind of his little bit of a backdrop of who this guy is. Genesis 14:14. When Abram heard that his nephew had been captured, he armed and led forth the 318 trained servants born into his house and pursued the enemy as far as Dan. Now, I don't think it would have been called Dan at the time. That was probably renamed later on. But that would just be where it is in reference to the people that would have been reading this originally years ago. That would have been a significant pointer, so they would be able to tell whereabouts it is. The tribe of Dan and Dan himself, because it's his tribe, wouldn't have occurred at this point in time, but the people reading Genesis in the early era would have known where this location of Dan was. Genesis 14:15. When he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants attacked and routed them and pushed them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. Same with Damascus, it probably didn't exist at that juncture in time. And then we got this kind of night raid going on there, so they waited for a good opportunity and they went in. But then again, maybe they didn't wait for nighttime. Maybe it took them till night to get there, and it was just getting dark. And they pursued this attack, and they kind of rounded them up, kind of an encircling method. Not a complete encircle, so they kind of pushed them back, right? So they gave them nowhere to retreat to, and they ended up, well, I guess they had a place to retreat to. They retreated to north of Damascus, so they probably cornered them in such a way that was the only direction that they would have been able to retreat to. And with his 318 trained servants, who were probably pretty strong, powerful dudes. And the other thing is, too, you look at this battle that they had, and where they took Lot, so they probably ran in there. Well, they had the battle, but then they ran in, and then they abducted Lot and probably took a whole bunch of other material wealth as well. And then they're kind of running away with this loot, and then they get chased down by Abram and his 318 trained servants. So they were probably tired out from the first battle, and then they were even more tired out after the looting, and then they're running away from Abram and his men, who are all fresh legs. So you got these fresh legged Abram's boys going in there to do a little bit of the combat against this weakened foe. So that's why it was kind of significant, and they were able to rout them probably so easily. It's not necessarily that Abram had overwhelming odds and superiority of force. It's that he had fresh men who weren't tired from a day of fighting. So they were able to kind of push them back and had them all worn out, and there we go, going in for the siege, although this wasn't a siege. Genesis 14:16. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his kinsmen, Lot and his possessions, the women also, and the people. So the people that were abducted and taken, the women that were abducted and taken, and all of Lot's possessions, and probably other possessions as well, and just bringing the stuff that was taken in the raid. So there we go. Lot's going to be able to go back because Abram has delivered him. Genesis 14:17. After Abram's return from the defeat and slaying of Chelmar and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shivan, that is the king's valley. So it looks like they slayed the king. and the people that were with him. So maybe it was a complete extermination at that point. Or maybe it could have been like he killed the king and the royal guard type of scenario. I'm not entirely sure how that went down. But either way, we got this king of Sodom coming out to greet him. 1418. Melchizedek, king of Salem, later called Jerusalem, brought out bread and wine for their nourishment. He was also a priest of God Most High. In the passage of time after the events of the flood, there was still a group of people, maybe you could almost say like a remnant of people that still worship the Creator God, the one God, the Most High. And that's what this Melchizedek is. He is a priest of God. He is also a king. So he is a king and he is a priest. Now, some people make the case or argument that this is actually God in the flesh, pre-incarnate, before he came as Jesus, that this was a version of him in the Old Testament. There are others who make the assertion that this is a form or a type, that this is something similar to what Jesus would be, in that he is a king and he is a priest. In the book of Hebrews, it kind of makes a reference that goes along that idea, that this was kind of a version of Christ being in the Old Testament. So in that, there are kind of three different views on this particular character or person of Melchizedek. Either it was a king of some nation, the nation of Salem, who was also a priest, who could have been a type or a form or a metaphor for what Jesus would later do in the being a king and a priest. Or we got the third option, which is that this is literally God in the flesh before the events of the New Testament. Although if you were to take that one, you could also say that this could be after the New Testament, because time doesn't really affect God in the same way it does us. And he could have already died and resurrected and then showed up back here because he can transcend time, and that could be how he was here. But I think that gets a little bit intense of a point of view, and I don't know if that's really the direction that it's going, but it is definitely a good precursor, having a type being similar to the role that Jesus would have, in that he is a king, he is a leader, as well as a priest, a follower of God. There's a lot with patterns, especially when it comes to the Old Testament, because all these patterns need to be set up in place to kind of verify the identity of Jesus later on. So, I mean, we'll go with that one. Genesis 14:19, and he blessed him and said, "Blessed, favor with blessing, made blessful, joyful, by Abram, by God Most High, possessor and maker of the heavens and the earth." Well, there we go. We know who he's talking about when he says that. And there's the other part too in the previous verse. I didn't really touch on it, but he talks about bringing out bread and wine. That's kind of something that we run into a lot in the New Testament as well. So there are a lot of parallels there, and kind of setting a precedent that will need to be followed later on. Genesis 14:20, and blessed, praised, and glorified be God Most High, who had given your foes into your hand. And Abram gave him a tenth of all he had taken. So what do we got going on here? We got the concept of tithing is 1/10, right? That's kind of where that word comes from. And Abram gave him a tenth of what I presume is his spoils he got from this capturing process. Although wouldn't that make that blood money? So that makes that a little bit weird. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but he was definitely giving a tribute to this priest because he was a priest of God. that he may be able to utilize it. It's kind of a strange passage, but it depends on your interpretation of who Melchizedek is. Is he just the king of Salem, which is a place, or is this God in the Old Testament? It is very interesting. Definitely more research is required, and anyone who's watching this video, which is presumably no one, should definitely look into Hebrews. I think it's Hebrews 7 where it kind of talks about Melchizedek, because it is very strange what has just occurred here. Or is that a tenth of all of his possession? That he had taken was in square brackets above when I read it. A tenth of all that he had taken. So that was added by the translators, but whether or not that was what the real text was saying, because it's hard to say what the translation is relative to what the original said. What's King James say? Let's start there. Genesis, what is this? 10 or 14:20 James. King James. Here we go. Here's the King James version. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemy into thy hand, and he had gave him tithes of all. Well, there we go. There's your tithing. I guess the word tithe does imply 10. So that's where the amplified version would have got that. It's probably whatever the original word for tithing is. Tithes. Let's see here. Meshayarm. I can't read Hebrew at all. From a tenth, usually, or especially a tithe, a tenth parting. A tithing. Okay, well, there we go. So he gave him a tithe. Whether or not that was a tithe of his spoils of war or a tithe of the possessions of himself. Maybe it's like almost like a taxation aspect of it that, this Melchizedek and whatever his kingdom of Salem was going to help protect them in the future. Maybe there's some sort of future relationship thing going on there. I'm not entirely sure what is going on there at all. The more I read, the less I know. That's just how you know you're on the right track. Well, let's just leave it there and we'll move on. Genesis 14:21. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons and keep the goods for yourself. Okay, so he wants him to return the people that he got from this battle, and he can have the goods. So the spoils, right? So I guess he gave a tenth of the spoils to the king of Salem, and then he's talking to the king of Sodom, and Sodom just wants the people back, but he can keep the goods. But Abram, he's not going to have that. He's going to do his own thing. 14:22. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand, and sworn to the Lord, God Most High, the possessor and maker of the heavens and earth. Well, that's who Abram worships. Genesis 14:23. That I would not take a thread or a shoelace or anything that is yours, lest you say, I have made Abram rich. So he wants the glory to be the glory of God, not the glory of the king of Sodom. So he's going to reject any reward given to him from the king of Sodom. Genesis 14:24. Take all except only what my young men have eaten, and the share of the men, allies, who went with me, Anir, Eskol, and Mener. Let them take their portion. So he's letting them have their portion of spoils of war. And he's like, provide us a meal, right? So they're going to get a meal, and a couple of his boys that did spectacular, he's going to let them have a little bit of possession. Let them have a portion. He's not going to reject the portion for all of those under him. Just a couple of them he's going to allow have their own portion. They must have like really pulled their weight. Powerful, mighty warriors of Abram. And there we go. We are at the end of Genesis 14. I've really enjoyed doing this kind of line by line thing. It's really interesting to really go line by line and try to figure out what's going on in every sentence. It just, I don't know, things that I kind of took for granted that I understood, I realize now that I know a lot less than I thought, even after studying for years. So, I don't know, we'll get there eventually. And once we get it to the end, we'll restart and do it all over again. And maybe by then we'll have a much greater level of understanding as our perceptions change and come into a better alignment with what the word actually says, and less about what you saw in some random video of someone explaining an idea without explaining it line by line in the Bible. So this Melchizedek thing is just, I don't know. I'm going to need some days to meditate on this one.